She wasn't supposed to notice me that way, not with eyes that carried years of grace and quiet storms. But the night she whispered, "You're playing with fire, and so am I." I realized some fires aren't meant to be feared, they're meant to be felt. The story begins in the kind of ordinary afternoon that never hints it might change everything. I was at my friend's house again, the same house I'd known since high school, where laughter and routine blended into something comfortably familiar. Yet that day, it felt different. Maybe it was the way the light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, or maybe it was the quiet hum of her voice as she moved about the kitchen. Elena, my friend's mom, had always carried herself with an effortless kind of grace. There was something steady about her, like she knew exactly how to move through the world without forcing it to notice her, yet it always did. She wasn't loud, she wasn't trying to be seen, and that was exactly why I couldn't look away. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands falling free to frame her face. When she smiled, it wasn't the smile of someone trying to impress. It was the kind that reached her eyes and stayed there, soft and warm. I told myself I was just being polite, just noticing the small things, how she always made sure everyone had what they needed, how she hummed absent-mindedly when she cooked, how the scent of oranges seemed to follow her like a signature. But when she handed me a cup of tea that afternoon, something small yet powerful shifted. Our fingers brushed, a tiny, accidental touch that felt anything but casual. The porcelain was warm, but her skin was warmer. My pulse stumbled in my chest before I could hide it. She noticed, not with surprise, but with that calm awareness she carried about everything. For a second, her gaze lingered on mine, and I saw something flicker there, curiosity, maybe, or recognition. Then she smiled, light and knowing, and turned away to stir the pot on the stove. The air seemed to change after that. Every sound felt amplified, the quiet bubbling of water, the clink of cups, the ticking clock on the wall. I found myself studying her in the small, ordinary ways people do when they're trying not to. The curve of her shoulders as she reached for a glass, the steady rhythm of her breath, the faint dimple that appeared when she tried not to laugh. When my friend called from the other room, she turned toward me again, her expression soft. "You've grown up so much," she said quietly, almost to herself. It shouldn't have meant anything. But the tone, warm, nostalgic, tinged with something unspoken, lingered long after I left that day. On the walk home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something invisible had begun between us. Not love, not yet, but a spark. The kind that hides beneath calm water, waiting for the slightest breath of wind to become a flame. The days that followed carried a quiet tension, the kind that doesn't need words to exist. I found myself at Elena's house more often than I had reason to be. Sometimes I'd tell myself it was just to see my friend, other times to help fix something small. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. There was a pull, subtle, magnetic, impossible to reason with. Elena welcomed me each time with that same calm smile, though there was a new hesitation in her eyes, as if she, too, felt something shifting between us and didn't know whether to acknowledge it or hide it. The warmth of her home wrapped around me the moment I stepped inside, the faint aroma of baked bread, the comforting hum of a soft melody from the radio, the steady patter of rain against the windows. Everything about that house felt alive because she was in it. One evening, it was just the two of us. My friend had gone out, promising to be back soon, but the hours stretched quietly. The rain outside grew heavier, tracing long streaks down the glass. We sat in the living room, 2 cups of coffee cooling on the table between us. The space was filled with the kind of silence that says more than conversation ever could. I tried to focus on the flickering light of the lamp, but my attention kept drifting toward her, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the way she tucked her legs beneath her on the couch, the faint trace of perfume that made the air feel delicate and close. She asked me simple things, how work was going, whether I still played the guitar, if I'd found peace living on my own. But behind her words I sensed something deeper, a careful distance she was trying to maintain, even as her tone betrayed the warmth beneath it. When I answered, our eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither of us looked away. Her lips parted slightly, as though she was about to say something more, but she stopped herself. The only sound was the soft thrum of rain. She reached for her cup, and her fingers brushed mine, light, fleeting, but charged enough to make my breath falter. She noticed. Her eyes widened for the smallest second before she smiled, that quiet, disarming smile that always left me unsure whether she was comforted or conflicted. Then, she leaned back, breaking the moment. "It's getting late," she said softly, though her voice carried a tremor she probably didn't mean for me to hear. I nodded, pretending not to notice. But as I stood to leave, her hand gently touched my wrist. Just a moment, not to hold me back, not to ask me to stay, just to feel that I was real. When I stepped into the night, the rain was cool against my face. Yet, somehow, I still felt the warmth of her touch, echoing like a secret I didn't know how to keep. That night, I realized something unsettling. Silence, between two people who understand each other too well, can be louder than any confession. I tried to convince myself that what I felt for Elena was harmless, just admiration for someone who carried life with quiet elegance. But lies, even the small ones we tell ourselves, have a way of fraying at the edges. Every time I saw her, those edges unraveled a little more. She'd started asking me for help with small things, fixing a light bulb, moving a shelf, bringing in groceries. They were ordinary tasks, but each one left behind a trail of moments that didn't feel ordinary at all. The way her eyes lingered when she thanked me. The soft goodbye that seemed to mean more than the word itself. The warmth in her voice when she said my name, as if it belonged somewhere familiar. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the porch with a book in her lap, sunlight resting across her hair. She looked peaceful, lost in thought, but when she saw me, a faint smile curved her lips, the kind that felt like it had been waiting for me. She offered me coffee, and I accepted, though what I really wanted was time, just a few more minutes in that soft, golden silence that seemed to surround her. We talked about simple things, the weather, music, how the neighborhood had changed. But somewhere in between, the conversation drifted into something deeper. She spoke of the years passing faster than they used to, of how people grow quieter as they get older, how it's easy to feel invisible even in a full room. There was no bitterness in her tone, only honesty. "I guess," she said, staring into her cup, "we all just want someone to really see us again." The words settled in me like a stone dropped into still water. I didn't know what to say. So I didn't speak, I just looked at her, really looked. The sunlight caught the soft lines near her eyes, traces of time and laughter, and I thought she never looked more human, or more beautiful. She glanced up and met my eyes. For a moment, I think she saw what I couldn't say. The air between us changed, heavier, closer, charged with unspoken meaning. Then she smiled gently, as though she had to stop the moment from deepening further. We sat there for a while longer, watching the trees sway. When she laughed at something I said, it sounded light and free, but her eyes carried something else, a quiet ache she didn't name. As I left that day, I caught my reflection in the window and realized I was smiling, too. But it wasn't a careless smile, it was one weighted with something new. Something dangerous. It happened on one of those evenings that felt too still, too expectant, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I'd stopped by to drop off something my friend had left behind, just a quick visit. But when Elena opened the door, the house was quiet, dimly lit, and she looked a little surprised to see me standing there with the rain still in my hair. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside. Her voice carried that same calm steadiness, but there was something new beneath it, something fragile, unguarded. The storm outside had deepened. Thunder rolled distantly while rain streamed down the windows in thin, steady lines. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, humming faintly as she unpacked groceries. I offered to help, maybe to have a reason to stay a little longer. She handed me a bag, and as I reached for it, our fingers brushed. The contact was brief, but it felt like touching electricity, quiet, sharp, undeniable. For a moment neither of us moved. The kitchen light flickered once, then again, before going out completely. Darkness wrapped around us, broken only by the warm glow of a few candles she'd lit earlier. The room shifted into something intimate, almost sacred. I could hear the rain more clearly now, and the sound of her breathing somewhere close by. When I turned, she was standing just a few feet away, her face half lit by the candle flame. Shadows played across her eyes, softening her expression, making her look both older and somehow timeless. "Looks like the power's gone again," I murmured, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She nodded, then took a small step closer. "It happens a lot around here," she said, and her tone trembled slightly, the first crack in her usual composure. The air between us thickened. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral, delicate, seemed stronger now, mingling with the rain-scented air that drifted through the open window. She looked up at me then, really looked, and I knew she felt it too. That invisible thread, that pull neither of us had dared to name. I should have looked away. I should have said something ordinary to break the moment. But I didn't. I just stood there, heart hammering, caught between wanting to step forward and fearing what it would mean if I did. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper, her voice trembling like the flame between us. "You're playing with fire," she said. The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy all at once. I swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. And then, after a long silence, she added, softer still, almost to herself, "And so am I." The room seemed to shrink around us. Neither of us moved, neither of us breathed. It wasn't a confession, not really. But it was enough to change everything. The thunder rumbled again, pulling us back to reality. She turned away, brushing her hair back with a trembling hand, and I knew the moment had passed, but its echo would stay with me forever. After that night, the air between us changed. It wasn't cold or cruel, just quiet in a way that hurt. Silence had replaced the easy rhythm we once shared, and every small interaction carried the weight of everything left unsaid. When I saw Elena again, she greeted me the same as always, gentle smile, steady tone, but there was a distance in her eyes, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. She moved around me carefully, as if afraid that even standing too close might set something off again. I tried to act normal, to talk about ordinary things, errands, her son, work, but every word felt like pretending. She laughed at my small jokes, but it was a polite kind of laughter, not the warm, real one that used to fill the room. I missed that sound more than I wanted to admit. The memory of that candlelit night followed me everywhere. I'd replay it in my mind, her whisper, the way her eyes had searched mine, the soft tremor in her voice. It wasn't what she said that haunted me, it was how she said it. The truth beneath it. The wanting she couldn't voice. Days turned into weeks. I told myself to stay away, to give her space, but each time I passed her street, something in me slowed. One afternoon, I finally stopped, just to return a book I'd borrowed months ago. I told myself it was nothing more. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, not upset, not angry, just startled. She stepped aside to let me in, but the space between us felt heavy with all the things we weren't saying. I handed her the book, muttering some excuse about finding it while cleaning, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. She nodded, tracing her fingers along the cover without meeting my eyes. For a moment, it felt like we were strangers again, polite, distant, safe. I turned to leave, but before I could reach the door, she spoke, her voice barely steady. "Don't stop coming around." It was such a simple sentence, but it froze me in place. I turned, and for the first time in weeks she met my gaze. There was something raw in her eyes, something she couldn't disguise anymore. "I thought," she continued quietly, "that staying away would make it easier. But it doesn't. It just hurts differently." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to reach for her, to close the distance, but I couldn't. Instead, I nodded slowly, feeling her words sink into me like rain into dry ground. When I stepped outside, the sky had just begun to clear after days of rain. The air smelled fresh, alive, but there was a hollow ache in my chest that felt anything but. I realized then that sometimes distance hurts more than closeness ever could. Because when you care deeply, Silence isn't peace, it's punishment. Weeks passed before I saw Elena again. Long enough for reason to dull the edges of memory, but not enough to quiet the ache. I told myself I'd moved on, that what we felt was just a fleeting current, a misunderstanding shaped by loneliness and timing. But lies like that never last. They wait, silent and patient, until the truth finds you again. It happened by chance. I was walking back from the market when I saw her in the distance, standing outside a small bookstore, sunlight catching in her hair. For a moment, I hesitated. Then she turned, and our eyes met. Whatever walls we'd built in the past weeks fell in that instant, wordlessly. She smiled, faint, uncertain, but real, and that was enough to draw me closer. Inside the shop, it was quiet and warm, the faint scent of old paper filling the air. We talked at first like two people relearning each other's language. Small things, how she'd been, how her garden was doing, how her son had started a new job. Every word felt both too much and not enough. Beneath the surface, emotion shimmered like light beneath still water, visible only when the silence stretched too long. Finally, she sighed, a soft, weary sound that seemed to carry everything she hadn't said. "I didn't mean to disappear," she said, her eyes fixed on the worn book she was holding. "I just didn't trust myself to keep pretending it didn't mean anything." The words hung there, fragile and trembling. I felt something inside me loosen, that quiet pressure I'd carried for weeks. "You don't have to pretend," I said softly. "Not with me." Her eyes lifted to mine, and in them I saw it, relief, fear, longing, all woven into one fragile truth. She took a small step closer, her fingers tightening around the book. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Not of you, of what this could become. Of what people might think. But even when I stayed away, I couldn't stop." She trailed off, shaking her head, unable to finish. I reached out, slowly, carefully, until my hand rested lightly over hers. She didn't pull away. Her skin was cool at first, then warmed against my touch. The world around us seemed to fade, the sounds, the movement, everything except the quiet rhythm of our breathing. Neither of us said the words, maybe because naming something so delicate might have broken it. But in that silence, we understood everything. We weren't stepping into something reckless. We were stepping into truth, one that had waited patiently beneath fear and restraint. When she finally smiled again, it was different this time, softer, unguarded, grateful. "Maybe," she said quietly, "it's okay to stop running from what feels right." Outside, the late afternoon light filtered through the windows, painting the room gold. Her hand was still in mine, and for the first time in a long time, either of us looked away. There's something gentle about the way life settles after a storm, the quiet moments that follow, when everything feels both fragile and renewed. That's how it was with Elena and me. We didn't rush to define what we were or what came next. We just let it be. After so much hesitation, silence, and fear, it felt like peace to simply exist in the same space again, without pretending, without apology. I started visiting more often, but not the way I used to. There was no hiding behind excuses or small talk anymore. Sometimes I'd bring her flowers from the market, simple ones, wild and unarranged, like something that grew by accident but stayed on purpose. She'd smile when I handed them to her, brushing a loose petal from her wrist, her eyes lingering on mine a moment longer than necessary. The world outside her home still carried its noise and opinions, but inside, everything felt slower, softer, like time bent differently for us. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings, a shared blanket draped across our laps as the sun slipped low behind the trees. She'd tell me stories from her younger years, the dreams she'd chased, the ones she'd let go of, the people who had shaped her. I listened, not as someone younger or older, but as someone who finally understood that connection has no boundaries except the ones we create out of fear. Sometimes, in the middle of her stories, she'd stop and just look at me, quietly, searchingly, as if she still couldn't believe I was real. I'd feel that same warmth rise between us, steady and calm, not the consuming fire it once threatened to be. This was different now, controlled, understood, cherished. One evening, as twilight deepened and the first stars appeared, she rested her hand on mine. You know, she said softly, I used to think love was supposed to burn, that it had to hurt a little to be real. But maybe it's not about that at all. Maybe it's just this. Her fingers tightened around mine, gentle but sure. The crickets sang somewhere beyond the fence. The world kept moving, but in that moment, it felt like we had stepped outside of time. I turned to her, seeing the faint glow of candlelight dance across her face. Then let's keep it this way, I said quietly. Let it glow, not burn. She smiled, that rare, unguarded smile that seemed to reach all the way to her soul. You always find the right words, she murmured, leaning closer, her voice barely above a whisper. We sat like that for a long time, not needing anything more than the quiet, the warmth, and the peace we had finally allowed ourselves to feel. It wasn't the beginning of a grand romance, nor the end of one. It was something rarer, a love that didn't demand, didn't rush, didn't consume. A fire that learned to glow gently, endlessly, just enough to light the dark, but never enough to destroy.